Welcome to the 3030 Health Podcast. The following discussion is for education and entertainment. It is not intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first discussing it with your doctor. Here is your host, Guillermo Ruiz.
Hello everyone, today's guest on the show is naturopathic Dr. Christina Bjorndal. Dr. Chris is a graduate of the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine and the owner of Natural Terrain Naturopathic Clinic in Edmonton, Alberta. Her practice focuses in mental health, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, bipolar disorder, and addiction. She utilizes nutrition and natural therapies to support the physical foundations of health. She's the author of the upcoming book, The Essential Diet, Eating for Mental Health. Dr. Chris is an engaging public speaker, and in this episode, she shares her story of regaining her mental health using naturopathic medicine. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and visit my website, 3030strong.com. Hello everyone, I'm here with Dr. Bjorndal. I was introduced by Dr. Bjorndal by my friend Adam Kosen a couple of years ago, and she has a super interesting story, and I wanted to bring it on the show. Dr. Bjorndal, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Just busy with boards. Just came back from a huge trip, and super excited to have you on the show. So for anyone out there that doesn't know about your story, what is your hero story? How did you go from being a civilian to carrying the weight of being a physician?
Oh boy. How much time do you have?
I could be here for 2 hours if you need me to.
So basically what happened to me was in my teenage years, I struggled with an eating disorder. I had bulimia, and there were some other little stresses that happened, like my parents getting divorced. And the bigger issue for me was struggling with the issue of I'm adopted. And so I was an overachiever. And because of that, had a little bit of this perfectionist complex. I always say to my patients, listen, I'm a recovering type A. So what happened was I continued pushing myself and overachieving into university. And at that point, I ended up, I found myself in a depression. And I didn't really understand what that meant because I only understood the word depression in the economic sense of the word, not the mental health or medical sense. And I had anxiety, and I was still dealing with the eating disorder sort of secretively. And then what ended up happening was I started antidepressants, and about 4 or 5 months after that, I swung into actually a full-blown psychotic manic episode, and then was diagnosed and labeled with bipolar disorder type 1. So I continued on this medical journey with pharmaceuticals, in and out of the hospital, in and out of, had several suicide attempts, one that left me in a coma with kidney failure on dialysis. I was told I would need a kidney transplant. And I can tell you, when I woke up from that coma, I was not a happy camper. And I had to really do some soul searching. And I realized that I didn't love and accept myself. And that was based on a study I read about, which involved 2 groups of AIDS patients. In this study, what they looked at is this one group of AIDS patients had a positive support group. Their family accepted them, their communities accepted them. And this other group, they were shunned from their communities and basically disowned. And they looked at the prognosis and lifespan of these 2 groups. And not surprisingly, the one that had the positive support group and the group that accepted themselves completely did better than the group that didn't. And what dawned on me and was really apparent to me in that moment was I did not like, love, or accept myself or the diagnoses I'd been given. I had been hiding that I was bipolar. At that time, I was working in the corporate world. I was reporting to a CEO. I had a high-profile job. I had everything going for me by all accounts. But to the core of my being, I was not happy. And hiding and living in shame with this diagnosis because of the stigma. At that time, there was a lot of stigma. There was no conversation going on like there is today. This is back in the mid-'80s. It was really not inviting to be openly discussing your mental health challenges at that time.
what's funny is that around that time, that's when Prozac became a wonder drug.
That's right. And
And
I was on that wonder drug.
well, quotation marks wonder drug, because that's just a suppression of symptoms. It's not a cure. And for some people it does not work and it makes things worse. But it's funny how, yeah, like it was a hush situation. No one wanted to have, because people would equate having depression or any mental illness as being loony, and because this huge company wanted to make gobs and gobs of money, they sort of like normalized and made it okay for people to have mental disease, which is good. It's just the means that they wanted to treat it is not the best.
Right. Well, and interesting enough, I was on Zoloft, which was supposed to be in a new and improved version of Prozac at that time that I had that suicide attempt that I was referring to, and one of the side effects of Zoloft is increased suicidal ideations. And the other thing too is that when you're in the corporate world, there's a lot of it's a little bit of a shark eats shark world, and so you don't want something to jeopardize your future career path potentially.
Such as a label.
That's right. Exactly. So I ended up wanting to make a career change, and I ended up learning about a mental health public forum, and it was called Regain Your Mental Health. And I went to it, and it was Dr. Abraham Hofer who was speaking. Have you heard of him?
No, I
Dr.
have
Abraham
not.
Hofer?
I'm
Okay.
writing down his name.
Abram, Abram, and then Hofer, Hoffer. He's a medical doctor who was very close colleagues with Linus Pauling. Have you heard of
Yeah,
Linus Pauling?
I have
Yeah,
heard of Linus Pauling. Yeah.
yeah. So Dr. Hofer is a nutritionally oriented psychiatrist. And so I went to see him, and he started me on nutraceuticals. And after starting his protocol, within 6 months, I was depression and anxiety free. And that I had not experienced for the 15 years prior. So I knew there was something to this. And I looked a bit further into it. I was seeing a naturopathic doctor as well. And at that, basically, I ended up making a career change after asking myself one question, which was, if money didn't matter, what would you be doing with your life? And so I listened to that small voice that came up that said, go back to school and become a naturopathic doctor or an orthomolecularly trained physician. And the next voice said, are you kidding me? You can't go back to school. So anyway, I had to go back to high school because I didn't have the science prerequisites because I did a commerce degree the first time around. And then I went back at the age of 33 to Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. And now here I am.
Wow. That's
So that's the story.
That's just incredible. Let's go back a little bit. And you said that, quoting that paper, you said that the people that had more support, they had better outcomes of life. And then you said that you didn't love yourself.
That's right.
Did you have a strong family support, or was that lacking?
I had very loving parents, but I think the challenge is that I believe that this wiring starts in utero. And so the attachment was never formed between myself and my parents, partly because when I asked about where I came from, the social climate of the day, what do you call them? The social worker told my parents to answer truthfully, to tell me that I was adopted, etc. But what happened was I didn't understand what that word meant, and so I processed it that I was just with them temporarily. And so somebody else was gonna come and care for me. And so I didn't allow myself to get very close, but then, as the years go by, nobody showed up. So eventually told my mom what I was thinking and how I was feeling every time the doorbell rang. And then she was just disheartened when she realized the miscommunication that had happened. So even though I grew up with in a loving environment with my parents, I didn't feel that to my core of my being.
What about, and we hear a lot about, your birth story, and were you breastfed, were you not? And so you don't know that.
I was not breastfed.
You were formula fed. So, that's
Yeah.
another layer of stuff.
Yeah.
So, it's funny when we have as a naturopathic, I finished my naturopathic degree now.
Yeah.
And
Congratulations.
thank you. It's so funny how we are in a bubble, like while we're going through school, and I sit down and I look around and everyone is so beautiful and so healthy, and we ask each other, so what supplements are you taking? And you go to clinic, and these people have, they have a different set of knowledge, and we go to school, and then we go to clinic, and we go home, and we eat clean food, organic food, and we go back to school, and we see beautiful people, and then we go and see healthy people, healthier people than the average doctor. And then you go out, shopping, and then you see people smoking, and you're like, what? There's people that still smoke, but we live in such a small bubble, and sometimes it's really hard for us, for people that listen to health news or health podcasts, to understand that people are very unhealthy. And how do we change that?
Yeah. Well, and I think actually, I just want to touch on one thing that when you asked about the breastfeeding. And interestingly enough, I went to an interesting lecture. I attended the AANP conference in 2003, and there was a lecture, and it was called, I don't remember the exact title, but the discussion was about, is breast best? And it was an environmentalist who was speaking, and she had research to show that depending on where you grew up, so if you grew up in the armpit of Detroit versus the Santa Cruz coast in California, perhaps breast is not best because of the level of toxins that are passed and transferred. I've been wanting to write about that article, or write an article about that topic, but I've actually been afraid because of the backlash that will come against me with respect to actually a lot of the naturopathic community is breast is always best, and I think they've got to take into consideration this environmental piece and what this lecturer was talking about, because it's not necessarily always best, actually.
And then in the day, you are 100% right. It's like if you were in Japan during Fukushima and you received tons of radiation, and at what point do you have to be 100% selfless and maybe move from your town, or not have a child if you want to be in that town, in order to give your future offspring the best outcomes?
Like, actually, before I had my son, I did a year-long detox. So, I mean, I had the benefit of time, so that was definitely a gift. But a lot of people don't take that into consideration. So, but I think, to go back to your question about when you see somebody, for example, who's smoking, or addictions are a big issue, and at the end of the day, most of us are addicted to something, whether we're going to acknowledge it as a healthy addiction, or we're going to acknowledge it as an unhealthy addiction. So but at the end of the day, it's still an addiction, whether it's exercise, sugar, coffee, cigarettes, tobacco, marijuana, alcohol, and then getting into the hardcore drugs. But they all come down to the core issue and the root, which comes back to love, because they're all feeding dopamine pathways, and that all comes down to this: do you love yourself piece?
And in even talking about like eating better, if you have someone that has, like, for example, in your case, bulimia or anorexia or body weight issues, and they start eating healthy, they can become orthorexic, which is the addiction to eating healthy, and that in itself can be bad. One of my friends, when he discovered this clean eating, paleo, whatever you want to call it, he became so orthorexic that he started walling himself off from his friends because he couldn't go out and eat, and he was just so neurotic about things.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, that's not good either.
and that's not good either. So, okay,
I have a friend like that too.
now, where has the allopathic community, where have they got it wrong? Why are we not mental disease free, or why are we making leaps and bounds like we're doing with gut health, like we're doing with obesity and things like that?
Well, one of the answers, I think, is that the Western medical or allopathic system is focused on only supporting that physical aspect of oneself. Unless they're referring you to a psychologist, perhaps. But what we want to understand is that there's physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects to every single human being that's walking on the planet. And if all you're going to focus on is that physical level, then you may be missing 75% of the puzzle. So the physical level, what I think also people need to understand that are listening, the physical level needs to be supported, don't get me wrong. But in naturopathic medicine, the distinction is that we don't just look at neurotransmitters alone. So for example, prescribing Prozac to deal with your depression. So we view, and this is what I talk about in my book that's coming out called Beyond the Label. It's basically, you want to understand on that physical level that there's 3 macro systems within you. You have your neurotransmitters, and there's 7 of them. So you have serotonin, GABA, norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine, glutamate, and some people include acetylcholine in that. But you also have your neuroendocrine system, which consists of all the glands which produce hormones in your body. That consists of your hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, ovaries, adrenals, testes in men. So the thing is, what you have to understand is every single hormone that is produced has as a symptom, when it's out of balance, depression and anxiety. So the root, when we talk about in naturopathic medicine, addressing the root cause, we have to tease out what's going on. What's the balance between the neurotransmitters and the neuroendocrine system? And then the final important system that plays a huge role in mental health that's ignored, I believe, by the Western medical system is the organs of detoxification. This gets into the concept of leaky gut syndrome and inflammation. There has been more discussion lately about the inflammatory concept affecting the brain. But the interesting thing for me was when I started Dr. Hoffer's protocol, I went from being depressed and anxious pretty much the entire month to feeling better for at least 2 weeks of the month. I wasn't a clinician. I had no medical knowledge. Upon hindsight now, when I look back at that, I realized, well, that's now telling me that my hormones were out of whack too, right? You're better for 2 weeks of the month with the basic protocol to support your neurotransmitters, but you're doing nothing to support your hormones. This is, in women especially. And then once I got that sorted out, and I did have hormone imbalances, it was, my mental health has been has improved. But I still had to go and look at the rest of these pieces, the mental, emotional, spiritual. That's just the physical level that I was talking about. So the way that I go about supporting all that in people is the foundation of your health house, you have to understand, is diet, sleep, exercise, and managing stress. If you don't put the right gas in the car's not going to run, right? And the next levels that we have to look at, and this is where I think the medical system is not focusing on, and that naturopathic doctors, I believe, need more training in. And I've also developed a course, which is happening at the end of September, which maybe a listener would be interested in attending.
Is this only for practitioners, or do you have something for people suffering from depression or any mental disorder?
Yeah, it can be. So there is a course for practitioners, but there's also one for the general public. This retreat that I'm referring to will be for anyone, whether you're a practitioner or not. At the end of the day, you're still a person.
Yeah.
So these areas include your thoughts, your emotions, how you behave and react in the world. I speak about the environment from 3 perspectives, the concept of what we were discussing a few minutes ago, the air, food, and water, and how environmental chemicals can block receptors in the brain so that you might be making the neurotransmitters no problem, but they're not getting in the door. And that's a big distinction and a real big shift that the medical community has to get. The Western medical community views that depression is a deficiency problem. You're not making enough serotonin, for example. So let's give you Prozac so you'll make more, so that the SSRIs will allow the neurotransmitters to float across that synaptic cleft and bind to receptors, and it increases the timing before it scoops it back up. But what if it's not a deficiency problem?
What if it's a reception problem?
It's a binding problem, right? The second concept with the environment is the concept of epigenetics, which means genes load the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. And that's a big one for me, because when I asked the question, why did this happen to me? Why did I have that psychotic event? I was told it was genetic. I didn't have the benefit of the genes to verify the truth, like the benefit of the genetic history.
Yeah.
Well, and actually I did 23andMe and nothing came up.
Back then?
No.
Oh yeah, like recently.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. In fact, our mutual friend Adam, he was the one that helped me with that. And then the last concept. So basically, I really like to emphasize this concept of epigenetics, because people get really wrapped up in the belief that because their parents had something, they're going to get something. I think the other thing with that statement, and people get really stuck in that, is then they feel like they're a victim and that there's nothing that they can do. So diet's not going to make a difference. And it's not true. It's not true.
So people that have had, and and I'm sure you've run into this, people that have high cholesterol, and they're like, well, there's nothing I can do. I have familial cholesterolemia. And that's it. And, it's more like an excuse to not look into the nitty gritty and try to fix that number that is climbing up steadily. But, oh, my father had high cholesterol. It's genetic. There's nothing I can do. It's easy to take a pill.
Yeah, that's right. We really have to work on shifting that belief in patients. And then the last concept about the environment is the concept of neuroplasticity, which is based on the book by Norman Doidge, who's a Canadian psychiatrist, called The Brain That Changes Itself. So the idea behind that is you're not fixed in any way, shape, or form. You can create new neural pathways in your brain, and just because you were depressed perhaps in the past does not mean you have to experience depression in the future. And then the last area that I think is super important that is missed in medicine is this concept of spirituality, and that ultimately wrapping everything up in compassion and love for yourself. Because at the end of the day, these changes that I'm going to ask you to make, you have to love yourself. And most people don't. A key question I ask in practice is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you love yourself? And the sad thing is, I usually get an answer less than 5, and sometimes I get a negative number. So if you're constantly at war with yourself, no amount of supplements is going to fix that.
And where can you buy love?
Yeah. Let's try and bottle it up. Let's work on that. Why don't we? Let's patent that.
So the allopathic physicians are really good at changing physiological pathways. They can use drugs to micromanage physiology. And we're like, well, we're naturopaths, and we sometimes, to a fault, spend a lot of time in the nutrition silo. And we can do amazing things with nutrition, but we forget about exercise. We forget about spirituality, and I'll be the first one to admit I'm a very type A person. Sorry.
That's okay. I'm recovering type A.
You're a recovering type A. Maybe instead of bottling love, maybe we should do a recovery group for type A personalities. So how do you tackle that? What steps do you what kind of homework do you give your patients when it comes to loving themselves?
Well, that we need another 10-hour conversation. But basically, I initially the first thing is developing awareness of, especially with depression and anxiety and eating issues, is about developing awareness of what's going on in our mind. What are the thoughts that are driving the bus, so to speak, and having awareness of that. And I teach a model called the 7 R's of working with problematic thoughts and breaking the thought emotion cycle. And this is all outlined in the book as well. But to take you through it briefly, first of all, what I explain to people is I draw a circle. So visualize, I draw a circle and I draw a line down the middle and I say, that's your brain. You got the left and right sides of your brain. Then I draw another circle and I make that the yin yang symbol. And I ask people, what's this symbol mean? Some people don't know. Some people say balance. And that's the answer. That symbol represents balance. And then I ask them, or I explain to them, the difference between Western society and Eastern philosophy is that in the West, most of us are living from the neck up. We live in our heads, and we're either left or right in our thinking generally. There's no yin within the yang or yang within the yin. There's really no balance because we're disconnected from the rest of our body. And as a result of that, and then I draw another circle, I say, we have a thought that triggers an emotion, which triggers a thought, which triggers an emotion, which triggers a thought. And around we go, stuck in depression, anxiety, eating issues, and not loving ourselves, as well as addictions, anger, resentment, etc. So the whole goal of naturopathic medicine, and then I draw a triangle and I write, is to have a mind, body, spirit approach. So thoughts are another word for what you hold in your mind. Body is where you hold your emotions. But we need this spirit piece, and we need to bring that in. And the way we're going to bring that in is by using one word. And that word is breathing. So just like I said, everybody's living in their heads. Everybody is just breathing with the top little bits of their lungs. And then I show them, I say, your lungs go all the way down to here. Your diaphragm pulls across, pulls down so your lungs can inflate. And what's sitting right underneath your diaphragm on top of your kidneys? Adrenal glands, right? Your adrenal glands. So we're not breathing properly. When I first told my naturopath that I was going to go and become a naturopathic doctor, all he said to me was, Chris, you know what you really need to teach people? You just need to teach people how to slow down and how to breathe properly. He's a big Qigong master. And so I said to him, well, okay, so do I really need to go to 4 years of medical school and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars at the end of the day just to teach people how to breathe? Are you kidding me? Right? But the point that I'm trying to make here is, so now we're going to integrate this with the 7 R's of working with problematic thoughts. So the first R is you got to recognize what are you thinking in your head? What are the thoughts that are driving? And we all have this sort of subconscious dialogue that's going on. And a lot of times it is very negative in people who are depressed and anxious. It's the I don't like myself thought. The next R is you want to refrain from following those thoughts any further down the spiral by relaxing into the breath. And then I teach them how to do some breath work, and I'll explain that to you really quickly. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Go through that?
go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So what I explain is also, just to go back to highlight the importance of the breath. What's the first thing we look for when a new baby is born? The breath. The first breath. It's not their first heartbeat, right? It's their first breath. And what's the last thing the end of somebody's life? The last thing we're waiting for.
The last breath. It's it's in our culture.
That's right. And what do you do when you've done CPR? The ABCs. The ABCs are dedicated: A for airway, B for breathing. You've got 2 things that is more important to check before you look for circulation. But I think in our society, we're very focused on the heart, right? And am I going to have a heart attack? Because that's the number one thing that gets people, right? In Canada anyway, and probably the United States too. So what we want to visualize with this breathing and understand, and I don't use the word meditation because that scares a lot of people, but I do ask them to visualize a Buddhist monk and ask them when was the last time they saw a stressed out Buddhist monk running around. It doesn't happen. Because why? Because they spend a lot of time in breathing, in meditation, right? So what I do is I ask people to put the right hand on their belly button, left hand on the heart. This balances yin and yang in you. The right side of your body is the yang side. Your belly button is a yin area. That's when you were connected in the womb to your mom. And this also represents, from your right hand and below, the first and second chakras in Ayurvedic medicine, which have to do with your sense of rootedness, security, belonging, connectedness in the world. The left-hand side of your body is the yin side. This is considered the healing side. I ask people to put this over their heart. The heart is a yang organ, so we're connecting yin and yang here, balancing energy systems. The heart is also the 4th chakra in Ayurvedic medicine, which has to do with the meeting of the mind and the spirit. So when you breathe, the other reasons I want your hands here are to illustrate that there's more serotonin receptors between these 2 hands than there is in your brain. So there's a huge gut-brain relationship. So this is part of the reason why people gain weight when they go on antidepressants. Second of all, there's more electrical activity happening in your heart, where your left hand is, than there is in your brain. Also, the third reason is when you take this deep inhalation and use your diaphragm to inflate the breath into your belly like you're inflating a balloon, you are tapping those adrenals and physiologically calming yourself. And you want to be able to feel that right hand moving, which is why I want your right hand on your belly. So breathing in through your nose, so you're just breathing in and you're going to inflate your belly the breath into your stomach like a balloon. So breathing in through your nose and out through the nose or the mouth. And you want to feel that right hand move. And we'll take another breath in again, breathing in and out. And when I do this in the office, I ask patients, we look out the window and we look at the trees in the distance and focus our mind's attention on those leaves moving in the wind. And after we do 2 breaths like that together, I ask them what was going on in their head. What were they thinking at that time? And they turn to me with their eyes like wide and bright and they say, nothing going on. And I said, exactly, that's exactly what we want. We want you to be in this zone where you're not triggering your negative physiology with your thoughts, because your thoughts affect your physiology. And that's the work of Candace Pert with P&I, right? Psychoneuroimmunology. So your thoughts affect your reality. And so we got to get people to be aware of what are they thinking, right?
And I have a question for you. I go to a lot of conferences. I have a lot of friends. We're naturopathic medicines, and we're like guinea pigs for the 4 years. We take a bunch of like neurotransmitter precursors. I personally find it a little bit worrisome that there are so many people taking 5-HTP. There's so many people taking all of these different amino acids in very purified forms just randomly. How can someone ensure that their diet has all of the neurotransmitters, the precursors to the neurotransmitters they need?
Yeah, so this is the thing. So first of all, I'll go back to the 7 R's, and then it'll segue nicely into answering your question.
Perfect.
So the next R after relapse is you got to realize you have to repeat this process. Okay, this is not something you can do one time only. And then we want to reaffirm whatever that negative thought was that we recognized. And then the last R is reward, which speaks to this concept of compassion. We want to be kind to ourselves. Again, many people are very much at war with themselves. But the other important reason why this is really important is because what people have to understand is there's two branches to your nervous system, right? Sympathetic and parasympathetic. And most of us are stuck in which state?
Sympathetic, yeah.
Right? But what's digestion?
Oh, that's para. Yeah.
Exactly. So I ask patients to do this breath work a few times throughout the day. So taking those 2 deep breaths before you go to bed at night, before you get out of bed, before you eat, whenever you go to the bathroom, and whenever you're standing around. People generally fill this space when they're standing around with their phones. And that's a perfect time. Or if you're waiting in a grocery lineup, it's a perfect time to just take a couple breaths and to try to reset your physiology to that parasympathetic state, because anxiety doesn't have a chance to rise in you if you're always resetting yourself, right? And also, so coming to this concept of digestion, and should people be taking these amino acids in refined forms or just using nutrition for that matter? I would argue, first of all, what's the first step in digestion?
Well, you're chewing. Well, not even like looking at food. You can
smelling.
Like it's so funny because I tell my friends, you can look at a burger, not even smell it, and you start salivating.
Yeah. That's right.
So it's not chewing, in smelling gets a little bit, now you have actual particles passing your, olfactory nerve, but you can activate those photoreceptors. And just by doing that, you can look at pictures of food and get hungry.
Yeah. So this is the thing, right? It's not chewing. Most people think it's chewing, but it's incorporating these other senses. And what have we done in our society? We have sacrificed cooking time for screen time. So everybody says, "Oh, I'm too busy. I'm too busy." Like one of my patients, she said to me, Dr. Chris, what I think is the biggest challenge for me, or the biggest obstacle to cure, is convenience. So what we're doing nowadays is we're not cooking. So therefore, we're not smelling. The signal's not going to the brain and coming down the vagus nerve to our stomach to get ready. It's not happening because we're unwrapped, down the hatch it goes. And then people got all these digestive issues. So we want to back up and understand that the very first step with digestion is getting in that parasympathetic state, number one. And number two, we want to start cooking and smelling or looking at our food. And then we want to start chewing the food, and everybody's chomp, chomp, swallow for the most part, or they're not, they're multitasking while they're eating. And I'm guilty of that as a busy clinician. I rarely get lunch. So, or if I do, it's, shoving something down my throat in the middle of a busy day. So, you do what you can, but awareness is always the first step. So to go back to answer the question about what, should people be doing this or what have you, it's really interesting. When I went to medical school, we had to analyze our diets. And the only essential amino acid I was deficient in was tryptophan. So, I don't want to swear on your show, but
hey.
Okay, is it okay?
Yeah.
So no shit, right? No shit, Sherlock,
yeah.
right? But guess what? Guess how many doctors asked me what I was eating in the 15 years prior? Not one, except for my naturopath.
In 5 minutes, how much can you get into? And you're talking about diet. We're not talking about poop. That's a whole different hour of talk.
I like that topic.
Yeah, exactly. So how?
I was interviewed for an article. It was called "The Scoop on Poop." So let's do that one too.
I'll make sure to put that on the show notes.
The scoop on. So I think the first step to answer your question is I think people need to be looking at doing a nutritional analysis. I mean, we offer that at our clinic. I offer that to all my patients. Just see what do you really need? Because I'm not for taking all these supplements willy-nilly. What does your body really need? What is your diet actually giving you? And then let's fill in the gaps with the right nutraceuticals. I mean, that's individualized medicine. That is what we excel at.
That sounds like the future of medicine.
Well, that is what every naturopathic doctor, I think, needs to be doing, right? Needs to be doing. So I'm not a fan of tryptophan. Well, first of all, tryptophan could go in one of three directions, right? First and foremost, we want it to go to make niacin. Niacin is used in every cell to make ATP in the Krebs cycle. That's the energy currency that we all need. And what's one of the biggest things you're going to see in practice? I'll give you the heads up.
Fatigue.
Fatigue. Yeah,
Even with depression and fatigue, they almost are married words.
yeah. But there's so many, that's such a vague symptom. There's so many root causes potentially to fatigue, right? And I think that's why I did so well on Dr. Hoffer's protocol, because he started me on niacin and niacinamide so that those coffers were full in my body, so that the tryptophan I took in from a dietary perspective, even though I was still deficient, maybe had a fighting chance to go on to make 5-HTP, then serotonin, then melatonin. But people have to understand that there's nutritional cofactors along that pathway from tryptophan to serotonin and melatonin, that if you're deficient in those, you're not going to get there, right? So, and then the problem with tryptophan is that if you are under stress, which we've talked about, which is going to be the number one problem that patients have is stress, the tryptophan gets shunted down another pathway called the chymeric pathway, and it forms quinolinic acid, and then that's considered more neurotoxic, and contributes to depression. So I think 5-HTP is a better choice because it's a one-way street to serotonin. Well, I guess I'd ask you, what's your concern with people taking 5-HTP?
Well, my concern is this. My concern is that let's start with diet with our patients, or with my listeners. Let's start with diet. Let's start with meditation. Let's start with better sleep. And that's going to benefit 90% of the people. If you need, pinpointed supplementation, go to a practitioner. You don't have to come see me. You don't have to go to Canada and see Dr. Bjorndal.
But you should see one of the two of us.
Yeah, but you should see one. Yeah, we're the best. Yeah, screw Adam. Don't go see that guy.
No, go see Adam if you have cancer.
If you have cancer, yeah.
We'll prevent that, so you don't need to. So we'll put him out of business. I'm just kidding.
But the problem is that what if you go into a manic episode because you think you're going to solve all your problems because you think you're smarter than you are. And we all think that. And get yourself either in a hole which is going to take longer for a naturopath to pull you out of, or B, not better. And then you're going to be like, oh, I tried it. It didn't work. And, but you didn't do you did the precursor, but you didn't do the steps in between, the cofactors. So that's where I get very nervous with people just trying out things. Now, I love to experiment on myself, but I am not chronically depressed. And you can get into a lot of trouble if you're not doing it right with the help of a practitioner. There's a reason there are doctors out there.
But I'll just touch back on that. So the thing is, 5-HTP, so it goes to support serotonin, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. But so generally with psychosis, those are more excitatory neurotransmitters. So there isn't. I just want to be clear that I don't believe that there's a link, and I have never seen in clinical practice a link between 5-HTP and manic episodes, but it's these excitatory neurotransmitters that you do have to be careful with, and these amino acids. So people have to understand that neurotransmitters are generally built on the foundation of amino acids. So that's where we would want to be somewhat concerned. My philosophy with supplements as well as with pharmaceuticals is minimum dose for maximum benefit for the shortest duration of time. Now, having said that, nutraceuticals are the building block of your body. They are what you need. When we boil us, at the end of the day, when we boil us down and get cremated, what are we? We're going to be minerals,
Yeah,
right?
carbon, yeah.
Water, right? We're not going to be Prozac and Lipitor.
Yeah.
So this is what you want to understand, that even though I'm saying minimum dose for maximum benefit, there is still I just wrote a blog article, the foundational 5. I mean, there's some foundational nutrients that we want to be taking whether we have a health issue or not, just because they're going to support our body to remain healthy. But pharmaceuticals, I mean, I'm not completely anti-pharmaceutical. And when you're working with bipolar disorder type 1 and schizophrenia, these are really difficult mental health conditions to manage. And sometimes a little medication goes a long way. But the key is, what we tend to do in Western society is drown these people. And actually, there's a good quote by Joseph Campbell that says, the psychotic drowns in the same water the mystic swims. And that's what we do. I mean, at one point I was taking 4 psychotropic medications. I mean, a little bit of overkill, I think, and many mental health patients are on a sleeping pill, an anti-anxiolytic, a mood stabilizer, an antidepressant. That's 4 right there. So there's a huge need for naturopathic doctors a huge opportunity for naturopathic doctors to help people not only perhaps hopefully decrease these levels of medications. And in my case, I don't take medication. I guess I'll have to put a little qualifier in there. If I don't sleep, and this is how you want to manage mania. Mania, sleep, like you said, diet, super important. And then you said meditation and sleep. And what did I say earlier? The foundation of health, diet and then sleep, right? I mean, I would argue maybe sleep is more important than diet.
I keep switching, like nutrition, sleep, I keep flipping around. I'm not sure which one's more important, and they probably are equally as important. In Western society, it's almost like people are proud. Oh, I only slept 4 hours, and we should, just like we are starting to talk about mental health, we should start talking about not being proud of those things, because 2 things happen. You make people feel bad because they maybe cannot perform as well in that scenario, and B, you are not performing as well. Imagine what you could do if you were getting 9 hours of sleep.
That's right. So I will take an Ativan, for example, if it's 2 in the morning and I've done all my self-care steps for sleep and it's just not happening. I will do a very small amount, but the amount that I've had to take in the last year, I think maybe twice, So, and I do it more as because I want to prevent a manic episode, or I'm concerned, because that's a big fear of mine is that. But at the end of the day, what I do teach patients is a heart exercise, which ultimately is how to trust your own intuition, how to learn to assess what are your needs. Particularly, I use this with my bipolar patients around this managing the sleep piece. So I journal before bed, then I meditate, and then I ask the question, what do I need to help me sleep tonight? Do I need anything, first of all? Yes or no? And the answers from the heart are always yes or no, generally. If it's a long-winded blah, 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 on and on and on, that's your mind or your ego getting involved. We want to try to set that aside and try to listen to this intuitive sense, because that is really another huge problem in our society, is people don't know which voice to listen to, and they're listening to their minds, and they're stuck there, and they're not able to listen to their inner wisdom, their inner self, their intuition. There's lots of words to use that describe what I'm trying to talk about.
So you have a ritual every night that you do where you right before you go to bed. One of my favorite things to do before I go to bed is take some magnesium, some magnesium citrate, natural calm, the powder that you put into the hot water, and and sip on it, and it's almost like there's a switch that says, okay, it's time to go to bed, and you start getting into this relaxed state. And magnesium is super amazing. You can have the most perfect diet, but magnesium is just so depleted from the soil that again, there are gonna be maybe some things that you're gonna have to supplement.
Yeah, like magnesium, I was just going to touch on that too. I just want to say for anxiety, so the forms of magnesium are important, and when people have anxiety, the magnesium bisglycinate form is generally, I find, helpful as well, because the glycine is a very calming molecule. And so and magnesium it's used in over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body. I mean, it really hasn't had its day in the sun, I think.
And we've been talking about magnesium for a long time, and we need to emphasize it. I know that the chelated forms of magnesium are much better absorbed. I just, for some reason, like the citrate. And I don't know,
Yeah, and
I
that's
just like
okay.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, but also I was going to say too, the other reason why magnesium is also very depleted is because it's one of the main nutrients your adrenal glands need, right? There's three main nutrients your adrenals need, and that's B5, vitamin C, and magnesium. And our society, like we talk about heart disease and cancer, then type 2 diabetes and mental health being the top four causes of death in Canadians and probably in the United States as well. But what's behind all of those, really, for a lot of people? It's stress. So I think we're chasing the wrong, we're barking up the wrong tree when we bark up these condition-oriented approach, when we take these condition-oriented approaches. And I think behind heart disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer, and mental health, there's a huge stress component. And that's the other area that I think naturopathic medicine shines, because we take the time to talk to people. How's your stress on a scale of 1 to 10? And what are your stressors? Is it family? Is it work? Is it relationship? Is it unfulfilled expectations because you're not following your passion in life? Are you spiritually unfulfilled? What are your, is it diet? What are your stressors,
Are you
right?
stressed about your clean diet? Orthorexia.
Some people are.
Yeah, some people are. Okay, for our listeners out there, what do there are stressors that you can mitigate. For example, eating a shitty diet is stress in your body. Drinking bad water is stress in your body. Working too hard where you're not sleeping, that's a stress in your body. How do you mitigate the stressors that you cannot control? For example, driving down and traffic is a mess. You have deadlines. You have school. How it's easy to explain to people that you can, how to control the stressors that you can control. But what about the stressors that you cannot control? What do you do for that?
Well, that's where this managing your reactions piece comes in. And that's where the breath work really is an important piece, because you and I could both be driving down the same highway, both run into the same car accident that's delayed traffic, and both have completely different physiological reactions and responses to that stress, right? One person gets really uptight and anxious and, oh my God, starts panicking because they're going to be late for whatever it might be. And the other person maybe has a broader understanding that, again, this is out of my, what can I control? And what you can control is your response to the situation. And what's that going to get you by getting your physiology all riled up in a negative way when that is out of your control, versus sitting back and accepting, okay, this is out of my control. And that's where that spiritual piece, I think, is really helpful, because if you truly believe, and I'm going to use the word God very loosely here, because again, I know there's lots of different religious backgrounds, and I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a sense of a higher power, so to speak, driving the bus, not you driving the bus. And so if you have the simple adage that everything happens for a reason, you accept that accident, and you hope that nobody is injured in that accident, but you accept that this has happened for some particular reason, for my benefit, for my higher good, and you don't get stressed out about it. So it's a shift in perspective and belief. And that takes a lot, I think, to learn people how to manage reactions.
So we talked about mental health for the patient. We talked a little bit. I'm going to ask you two questions. Okay. So first, what diet would you recommend for a person that is going through this for mental health benefits? And then secondly, could you talk to the people that don't have depression and they're looking from the outside in, and they just can't understand that you can't just turn that frown upside down, because that seriously drives me insane. It populates my Facebook feed and my Instagram, and it's just these messages about, why can't you just be happy? Just change your mind frame. Sometimes, and we go back to physiology. Sometimes physiology might be making you unable to be happy. And then all of the different spiritual and all of the different, physical and everything can be, that could be the stopgap too. but sometimes people are unable to feel happiness.
Right. So the first question about diet, I actually have a my suggestion is to follow the essential diet. So I've just written a book called The Essential Diet: Eating for Mental Health. And that came about because of in writing my book Beyond the Label, which is part memoir, part solution guide to dealing with mental health. I realized that not everyone might not want to read about my descents into depression and ascents into madness and mania. They might just want something simple, such as what do I eat? So I created the Essential Diet, and that's going to be available. It's actually just at the printer right now. So I'm hoping that it'll be on Amazon within the next 2 weeks. So please check that out and look for that. It'd make a great gift for somebody. But the problem is that if you are 10 out of 10 depressed, it's difficult to care for yourself at all. And I know for myself, I mean, when I was first struggling with depression and my third year of university with my undergrad degree, my mom had to get me out of bed. She had to brush my teeth. She had to dress me. She had to feed me. I mean, I was not functioning. And so for those people that, and I had many friends say to me, "Oh, come on, Chris. Yeah, just snap out of it. What's
Just
your
snap
problem?
out of it. Just,
Just snap out of it."
just why don't you just, go for a jog and maybe
Exactly.
just shake it off?
Yeah. So what you need to understand is saying that to a depressed person is like asking a blind person to see or asking a deaf person to hear. We physically cannot do what you're asking us to do because of that physiology. Remember at the beginning I said there's 4 aspects, right? Physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And the challenge with depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder for that matter, and eating issues for that matter, is it's all 4 aspects need to be addressed. So you need to start with that physiology piece by introducing the right diets and the supplements, and perhaps medication might be necessary. Because if you're so far down the rabbit hole and you're a 10 out of 10 depressed and all you're thinking about is suicide, I'm sorry, but no amount of 5-HTP is going to get you there. Really. You're going to need a little bit of antidepressant, I think. That's
Yeah,
my opinion.
eating
Yeah.
collagen, out of the box is not going
Not
to.
good.
It's not all that glycine is not going to
I
be.
mean, it might help
It
you,
would
but who's
help.
to say? Who's to
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
right? But I think the thing is, you want to have the goal here is perhaps to help people is to help people get well. But that is a bit of a how do I say this in a nice way? You know, we're not going to prevent everybody from committing suicide, right? But my goal here is to try to save as many souls as I can. But I understand, and this is maybe perhaps a conversation for another day because we are trying to wrap this up, is this concept of soul contracts. What are we all here for? I feel that I am here to learn to love and accept myself and teach people how to love and accept themselves. But to answer your question about the people who don't understand depression, I think, my husband is a perfect example. He's had a little bit of depression, but not really, and he doesn't really get me, nor does my father. My father's another good example. They don't get depression, but you know what? They don't need to, and neither do you. But what you need to do is you need to stand by in love with that person that's struggling. And you need to extend your helping hand to them by offering them a meal, by sitting with them, and you got to spoon feed them if you have to, by calling them and not getting your nose out of joint because they don't call you back. Because you know what? We're not going to call you back. We're not. But you got to keep on knocking and you got to break that door down to that person's heart. So you don't have to understand it, but you have to stand by in love. And most people don't. They take it personally. I've had friends who have really got this. Like they're not depressed. They've never been depressed, but they're always knocking on my door. Always, because they know that the real Chris, the undepressed Chris, is in there. The clouds have just come down and they will part again. And if you're listening to this and you're depressed right now, the clouds have come down, but they will part. The sun is still behind those clouds and they will lift. But you need the physical support with the diet. You need some help. It's really hard to ask a depressed person to start cooking, right? So, and then we didn't touch on this, but you know what's really helped me a lot? A backdoor into the diet. It's exercise. Most depressed people, well, sleep can go one of 2 ways with depressed people. They can either be sleeping all day long, which is what happens to me. I'm surprised how much sleep I can get 26 hours in a day, right? And we all know there's only 24 hours. So, but some people don't sleep when they're depressed. So it can be one of two ways. But what has helped me recover from many depressions is exercise. So one was a friend when I was living in Fort McMurray, and this I would classify as probably a postpartum depression, although it was when my son was 2. But anyways, I slipped into a depression. This was in 2009. And I was practicing as a naturopathic doctor. And this is steps back to the 7 R's. We always want to, one of the 7 R's that I might not have mentioned is reflect. So with every depressive episode I've had, I reflect. Okay, what happened? What went wrong? Did I stop exercising? Did I stop eating right? Did I stop taking my supplements? Did my sleep go off? Did I have a stress? Did I have a upset with a friend or some sort of something? What tipped the scales to plunge me down? Did I stop practicing the 7 R's? You want to reflect so that you can do something different in the next time around, right? So anyway, this one friend of mine asked me to play tennis, and I went. So what am I doing with that? I'm having social interaction. I'm getting outside, moving my body, and I'm getting vitamin D because I'm out in the sun, right? And then what did that then do? Well, that kind of stimulated a little bit of appetite for me. It was funny. My pastor, he said to me, when I went to church, I walked in and he said to me, Chris, do you have anorexia? Because I tend not to eat when I'm depressed because I'm sleeping all the time and I lose weight, like boom. And I looked at him and I said, no, it's called depression. So that exercise, that friend asking me to play tennis, I stimulated my appetite a little bit. Now I'm eating.
Getting those precursors in.
Yeah. And so next thing you know, that was one of the keys for recovery for me. But I want to say this as well, and then I promise we'll stop.
I
But
got it all day long.
but asking same as I said, asking a depressed person to, and I'm not saying you have to cook a gourmet meal here. You just have to feed yourself the right nutrients. So if you're going to eat, and most people are, pick something that's going to fuel you, not complete carbohydrates, right? Get in that protein, have a chicken breast, have some vegetables, but put in your body something that your body can use. Not empty calories, which is what 99% of people are eating.
And it's funny, it's almost like, oh, I'm depressed. I'm going to grab a bunch of sugar and just going to eat. And that in itself is a stressor.
Absolutely. So anyways, we'll stop there. I mean, I have a whole section that I talk to patients about and that I've written in my book, which I think is going to be I am going to write another book about the eating disorder part and just how to manage that. Because again, like you're saying, there's this, it's once people start down this healthy road, sometimes they end up in that orthorexia category. So how can we stay balanced with our nutrition and still enjoy and not get caught up in guilt and shame and blame if we do end up eating a chocolate chip cookie?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So Dr. Chris, how can people get a hold of you? What are are you on social media? What's your website?
Yeah, I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Website is Natural Terrain, TERRAIN.com. And we have a blog. I have a blog. Maybe I'll send you the handles and you can post them somewhere.
Yeah, I'll definitely add them. And then your book that's coming out, what's the expected date?
The Essential Diet Eating for Mental Health is coming out the end of this month. And then the Beyond the Label, which is the 21 chapter book that goes through my journey as well as the solutions guide to treating your mental health naturally, that will be available beginning of October. It's just with the publisher now. And there's a companion journal to that book, which is already available on Amazon. I'm a big proponent of journaling. I think it's a lost art. People are so busy on their phones, and keeping that mind activated versus journaling is a wonderful way to calm your mind and to take all the busyness out and dump it onto the page. So the companion journal is available now on Amazon. It's called Moving Beyond, a journal into self-inquiry.
And, can you talk a little bit more about where can we get this training, for the layperson, for me as a clinician, in the future? How can I get this training?
So there's the books, as I've mentioned, but there's also an online course that I've created. And so it's called Moving Beyond. And there's a course for clinicians, which goes into a little bit more detail into the physiology and biochemistry. But then there's also a course for just an individual who isn't a clinician, but is struggling with their mental health. And this course, again, goes through what we've talked about: diet, sleep, exercise, managing stress, but it also goes into how to set boundaries and managing your thoughts and your reactions, and talks about how to develop your intuition. And it's a 10-week course. And so for information about that, you can go to naturalterrain.com and look on the link that says shop or products. And I think it's really important to also add a disclaimer, though, that if you are going to take this online course, that it's still important, I think, to be working with someone locally. See a naturopathic doctor in your area. And I'm happy to point you in a direction, so you can always contact me through my website. And then lastly, there's the in-person retreat. If you want to go a little deeper with me, that I'm teaching this with a colleague, and he has also written a book on mental health. And so we're really excited about this in-person event, which is a weekend, September 29th, 30th, and October 1st. And that's happening here in Edmonton. So you can also reach out to me, and there is information on my website about that too, as well. So those are some other things and options for people to start helping themselves, today, really.
When we talked about self-supplementation and just experimenting yourself, a person that treats himself as a fool for a patient. So diet and exercise and sleep helps 99% of the people for 99% of their problems. But there is that 1%, and you need someone that from the outside looking in, that is not a family member, that is not, your best friend, someone that is going to be completely unbiased and help you and guide you. And that's where a practitioner is just so important. Dr. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show. Maybe we can loop around in whenever Beyond the Label comes out, and maybe we can have this conversation and delve deeper into signs and symptoms and how to identify and strategies for people that like me that I don't have depression, and sometimes I don't understand, and I'll be the first to admit it, so we can reach our hand without being obnoxious, without being and truly heal people.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me this conversation, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.
Good luck on your boards.
Oh, thank you.
You'll ace them.
Bye.
Bye.